All right, ISHR. This is the second part of the current lecture, and we're just kind of continuing on with our learning goals. Our learning goals that we have not yet covered are: why do we measure GDP? What is the significance? How do we cover or how do we calculate real GDP? And what is inflation? And finally, how do we calculate GDP per capita? So we're going to go over those things. Let's talk about, why do we measure GDP? Why is it significant? Why is it important? Well, we measure GDP from year to year because it lets us see if our economy is growing over time, or the performance over time. So for example, if the US economy made 17.2 trillion last year and it rises to 18 trillion this year, we know that the economy is growing. So it lets us know that more is being produced, and that basically, effectively, like, the income of the country is rising, and that is usually a good thing. That's something that most countries want. Economic growth, which is an increase in real GDP over time, is something that all economies want, and by measuring GDP, it allows us to understand how well we're doing. Also, it lets us look at how other countries are doing, understanding how they are growing, and what they're doing, and how their circumstances relative to ours, or why they're growing faster than we're growing. And so it allows us to look at other countries' performance and our performance as well. Also, there are times when GDP shrinks. When it shrinks for 2 or more consecutive quarters, this is called a recession. Now, if economic growth was bad, or it was negative rather, for a while, it helps us understand other factors like unemployment. Usually when we have a recession, there is unemployment associated with that recession. And so it helps us understand other things that are sort of impacting our economy. Finally, when we use GDP, we can figure out the average income per person. It's a really simple formula. We're going to go over it, but by finding the average GDP per person, we can kind of understand what is the average amount of money that a person in that country makes. And in a way, it can give us kind of an idea, not a perfect picture, but a pretty good idea about people's living standards. Like average living standards in Germany, average person makes about 44,000 euros a year, approximately, which is pretty good. Whereas you go over to, I don't know, go to Croatia, for example, the average income is 20,000 euros a year, so it's substantially lower. And so, we can understand a little bit about what the average life is like in these two countries. And I'm not trying to say one is better than the other, but average income is higher in Germany. Anyway, these are some reasons why we measure GDP. All right. So next we need to talk about something, inflation. Nominal GDP, or nominal national income, is just the raw figure. Real GDP takes the value into account with inflation. Inflation is this idea that all prices rise over time. As you can see in the diagram below, or the little advert, you can see that prices of a lot of different things are going up. Strawberries are getting much more expensive. Chicken, potatoes, ham, all sorts of different types of foods are getting more expensive. When everything gets more expensive in an economy, we call this inflation. And basically what happens is the buying power of the currency is lower. If I had $3, I used to be able to buy, $2 rather. If I had $2, I could buy a pound of strawberries. But now I need $2.79 to buy that same pound of strawberries because the price has gone up. So the price of everything has gone up, and the buying power of my currency, or my dollar or euro, what have you, is now lower. So it's important to measure inflation to figure out how much prices have changed. as you can see, all these things have gotten more expensive, so we do have some inflation. And one thing that's important with regard to real GDP is we want to take inflation out of the equation with real GDP because it allows us to understand the value, the real value of what we made and if the economy's really grown. For example, if, looking at that diagram below the picture, you see let's say there was 100,000 chickens produced in 2015, the beginning of 2015. And let's say those chickens cost $1.49. And the production stayed consistent throughout the whole year. But at the end of the year, the price rose to $2. We've made the same amount of chicken, but now the value of those chickens are higher. Now, if we would calculate GDP with inflation, without inflation, then we basically think that we're making more output because the value of everything has risen. So we think, oh, we're more productive. However, we're not more productive because it's just the value of everything has gone up. We haven't necessarily made more chicken or more onions or more whatever. So again, this is why we adjust for inflation. So in order to calculate inflation, we have to use something called a consumer price index. And this is also called a CPI. A CPI takes a basket of goods, right? A bunch of different things that people buy. And we use that CPI in order to figure out how much inflation has gone up. And we also use it to calculate real GDP. So the formula for a CPI in a given year is we take the value of the basket in a given year, so how much it costs to buy everything in that given year, and we divide it over the base year. So for example, if I do the value of several goods in 2015 and then I compare them, that same basket of goods in 2014, I divide it the given year over the base year and then I times it by 100 and I can see how much inflation has gone up. So you see the formula here. Let's go ahead and write that down. CPI for a given year equals value of a basket in a given year over or divided by value of the basket in the base year times 100. Let's go ahead and look at a real-world example. Let's take 3 goods and services. We've got a hamburger, a DVD, and a haircut. Okay, looks like we'll say that this is in euros. A hamburger is 4 euros. A DVD is 15 euros, and a haircut's 20 euros. So if I add up those 4 goods, the value of the basket is 39 euros. So it cost me 39 euros to buy those 3 things. Now when we look at the next year, 2014, we can see that a hamburger's gotten a little bit more expensive, DVDs actually got cheaper, and haircuts got more expensive. Now, did everything get more expensive? Well, no, it didn't. Some things got cheaper. So that's why inflation refers to a general rise in prices. Generally, things have gotten more expensive. So while one did get cheaper, generally things have gone up. So now for that same basket of goods, if I want to buy the same basket of goods, it now costs me 41 euros and 50 cents. Everything's gotten more expensive. I need more money to buy the same things. So again, that would basically be the 2 baskets for those 2 years. So what I want you to do is you've got all the numbers there. I want you to compare and find what is the CPI for 2014 and 2015. Obviously, if you can't do 2013 because we don't have a base year, a year before. So if we just did 2013 as the base year, we'll call that year 100. So, or year 0. So that's the base year, and sort of 100 would be the benchmark, would be the sort of the 0 point in this formula. So let's go ahead and calculate that. Divide the basket price in 2014 over 2013, times it by 100, and then do it again in 2015 and see what the CPI says. Go ahead and pause, and you pause the video and start it when you have calculated. Okay, I'm guessing you've calculated. Let's take a look at the answers. Let's see, in the base year, actually I changed the year, sorry, it should say 2013, 2014, 2015. I previously modified this. So in 2013 it was 100. In 2014 it should be 106.2. Prices, if you think about, if 100 was the base year, if we did, basically the 39 over 39 times 100, the value would be 100. So if we did base year over base year, we would have 100. However, if we do the value in 2014 over 39, so 41.5 divided by 39 times 100, we get 106.2. Basically what that means is that prices have gone up by 6.2% on average. So we've got a little bit of inflation. Now, if we compare that, from 2008 to 2009, so if we did, was it 46? Sorry, let's see here. Oops, I went forward, not backward. If we did 46 divided by 39, we get 117.9. So you can see that between 2013 and 2015, prices went up by almost 18%, which is a lot of inflation. Okay, nominal versus real GDP. Economists prefer to use real values. So what we do to calculate real GDP is we basically take nominal GDP, right? So we can use the expenditure method and add up the consumption, the investment, the government spending, exports minus imports, add that all together, that's the nominal GDP. We then take the CPI, which in our case was for between one year and the next was 106, I believe, and then we divide the GDP we've calculated by the CPI, 106 point whatever, and then times it by 100. The other way you could think about it is 100 plus whatever the inflation. So kind of in the previous slide we saw that inflation was about 6%, 6.4 or whatever it was. If we added 100 to that 6.4, that would be the same as the CPI. So again, we divide whatever the GDP is nominally by the CPI or inflation, times it by 100, and that will give us the real GDP. So that's important as well. Just note that when you use this CPI, or the inflation rate plus 100, this is what's known as the deflator. It deflates the nominal GDP to give us a real idea of if we've actually grown or not. So anyway, this is how we calculate real GDP, or GDP adjusted for inflation. All right, total versus per capita. The total GDP obviously is, what it is in total, what the whole economy is made. Per capita refers to the average per person. The average, and in this case, average income per person. So all we have to do, it's very simple. We basically divide the GDP by the population, and that will give us the GDP per capita. Now, one thing to remember is that sometimes it's not always the best representation of actual income per person. Because, we have a lot of people that make a lot of money at the top and a lot of people that make a lot less. Or, sorry, a few people, rather, that make money at the top and a lot of people that make a lot less money. For example, if we were to take the 11 employees, that work at a factory, 10 workers and 1 manager. The 10 workers earn 40,000 euros per year, and the owner earns 800,000 euros per year. What does the mean? Well, if you calculate that out, you're going to find out that maybe the average income per person at that factory is not actually a very useful statistic, because really you've got one person making a lot of money, and that one person sort of pulls up the value for everybody else, but it's not really realistic. Maybe a better indicator might be the median income. What does the middle person make? When we look at it in a row. Anyway, so just note that averages is not always the most useful way of measuring income per person. So just note that income distribution is usually referred to as income per capita, and again, sometimes it is a little bit misleading. Finally, we use real GDP per capita also to understand if the standards of living have gone up for people. So for example, if GDP rises, that usually hopefully means that GDP per capita has risen. And so if that's the case, then we usually think, if everybody's making more money, their living standards have probably gotten a little bit better. So real GDP per capita can also, if it goes up, can indicate a better standard of living. Okay, one last just little food for thought. Note that GDP can also have some problems. One, sometimes things aren't measured by GDP. Some things kind of are under the radar. It's not counted. So GDP can be misleading in this way. Also, certain things are hard to place a value upon, like a nurse or a teacher. I mean, we pay them a certain amount of money, but how much value are they really creating? There's externalities there associated with this production, so it's something to think about. You also generally use their yearly income as the worth of the worker, but is that really the value? Is that the value to society? So it's kind of something to think about. Okay, let's do a quick quiz. Quick quiz. I'm going to say a question, you pause, answer the question, see if you got it right. Let's review. What was green GDP? What was green GDP? Pause, answer the question, see if you got it right. Next question. What was the difference between GDP and GNI? GDP and GNI. Next. How do we calculate GDP per capita? GDP per capita. Go ahead and pause, answer the question. Okay, did you answer? Let's move on. Finally, what is the deflator and how do we use it to calculate real GDP? All right, so let's just quickly go over the answers. Green GDP, obviously, it is GDP that takes into account environmental degradation and negative externalities that are associated with the environment. Next, the difference between GDP and GNI. Well, GDP is the final value of all goods and services produced in a country over time. Gross national income, on the other hand, is basically the value of the income earned from the factors of production, regardless of where those factors are located. So basically, it looks at, it's basically GDP plus net income from abroad. All right, GDP per capita, that's an easy one. Just take GDP and divide it by the population. What is the deflator? Well, the deflator is CPI. We take GDP, we divide it by the CPI, or the deflator, and then we times it by 100, and we can calculate real GDP, or GDP adjusted for inflation. Anyway, that's it. I hope that helped you, and good luck, and we will see you soon. See you later.